Thank you very much for that lovely warm welcome. Good afternoon, I'm Viv Groskop. I'm a writer, comedian, BBC Radio 4 presenter, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for this very special event. Before we begin, could I ask everyone to turn their mobile phones to silent? We're filming today and live streaming over the web, so a very big welcome to those of you joining us online, and a reminder that the hashtag is hashtag RSA4, F-O-U-R. So please do join the discussion on Twitter. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker today, Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen is a hugely successful podcaster and author of the internationally best-selling books, The Happiness Project, Happier at Home, and my personal favourite, Better Than Before, a book which has completely changed my life and caused me to lose 3 stone. Thank you. Her lifelong investigation into happiness, habits and behaviour change led her to the subject of her latest book, How We're Motivated and How We Respond to Expectations, both internal and external. This is a book called The Four Tendencies, which examines the 4 different types of people that Gretchen identified in Better Than Before. It features insights, cutting-edge research, ancient wisdom, and of course, Gretchen's own observations. Please welcome Gretchen Rubin.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to meet Viv face to face. We've been long-distance friends for a while. And what a gorgeous space. I've never spoken in such a magnificent room and in such a beautiful building. And so thank you so much for having me here today. So as Viv mentioned, I am going to talk about the 4 tendencies, which is this personality framework that I've devised that divides people into 4 categories. So I will give an outline of it for about 20 minutes, then we're going to have a brief conversation, and then we're going to have time for your questions. So be thinking of your questions, because that's always my favorite part. But before I begin, I want to ask you a few questions. First of all, raise your hand if anyone has ever accused you of being too rigid. My hand is up. I am accused of being too rigid. Okay, good. We'll talk later. Next, has anyone ever told you that you ask too many questions? Yeah. Oh, I heard a yes. Resounding yes. Have you ever thought to yourself with regret, commitments to other people, they can't be broken. But commitments to myself, they can be broken. Yeah, there's some hands. And has anyone ever told you, why is it that you will never do anything I ask you to do? There we go. All right. So these will set the stage for the 4 tendencies. I got my first insight into the 4 tendencies when I was having a conversation with a friend, and she said something that absolutely electrified me. My sister Elizabeth calls me a happiness bully, and in my own bullying way, I was grilling her about her habits and her happiness. And she said to me, you know I would be happier if I exercised. And the weird thing is, when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? And I thought, well, why? It's the same person. It's the same behavior. At one time, it was effortless. Now she can't do it. What's going on? And I became determined to figure this out. And I began to notice other patterns, too. And they were all swirling around in my head, and I couldn't get them to make sense until one day I was looking at my to-do list right by my computer, and I realized that the key notion at the heart of so many of these patterns was expectations. How we respond to expectations. And it turns out that how we respond to expectations has huge consequences for how we form habits and how we make a lot of decisions in our lives, and also how we can understand how other people are behaving or why we might be having frustration or difficulty with them. Now, of course, we all face 2 kinds of expectations. There are outer expectations like a work deadline or a request from a friend. And then there are inner expectations, like our own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, our own desire to get back into practicing guitar. So depending on how you respond to expectations, you're an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. So I am going to go through these very quickly, and then I want you to raise your hand, because I think it'll be really interesting to see who's in the room. And then I'm going to briefly give you some quick tips for how to think about each of the tendencies. And then again, we'll have time for conversation. So first, upholders. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They keep the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect of them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do it if they think it makes sense. So essentially, they make everything an inner expectation. If they're satisfied that something makes good sense, they'll do it, no problem. If they think it doesn't make any sense, they will refuse. Typically, they hate anything arbitrary, inefficient, irrational. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And this explains my friend on the track team. When she had a team and a coach waiting for her, she had no trouble showing up. But when she was trying to go running on her own, it was a struggle. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do. They can do anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they are very likely to resist. And typically, they don't even want to tell themselves what to do. Like, they don't want to sign up for a 10 a.m. yoga class on Saturdays because who knows what they're going to want to do on Saturday. So those are the 4. Now I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you know which one you're in. And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, I question the validity of this framework, you are probably a questioner. So the first is upholders. Upholders readily meet outer and inner expectation. My hand's up. That's my tendency. OK, we got a good number of upholders. OK, next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. Next, obligers. Obligers readily meet outer. They struggle to meet inner. And finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. OK, so interesting. This is a slightly different than what I would typically see. Typically, what you see is obliger is the largest tendency. In the world, you either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. For both men and women, this is the biggest tendency, the one that the largest number of people belong to. Next is questioner. I think we had more questioners than obligers in here. That's a little unusual, but questioners are like second to obligers. The smallest tendency, it's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a small tendency, is rebel. But only slightly larger than rebel is my tendency, the upholder tendency. And I remember when I was coming up with the 4 tendencies, I went into my husband and I was like, do you know what? I'm part of this like extreme small personality type. And he was like, you think? He was not surprised. So those are the 2 sort of extreme ones. They're small. Most people are questioners or obligers. So if you're developing a curriculum, if you're designing a device, if you're trying to think about a large number of people, if you're thinking about a message or signage, you want to think about the fact that a lot of people are going to be questioners or obligers, but you're going to have those upholders and rebels out there too. So what do you do with this information? How can it help you manage yourself better, and how can it help you deal better with other people? So now I'm going to go through each of the 4 tendencies and give you just like a few key ideas before we have questions. So first, starting with upholders. Each of the tendencies has many mottos, and my favorite motto for upholder is, discipline is my freedom. That is the view of an upholder. And there's a lot of great things about being upholders. They're self-reliant, they're self-starters, they're very good at executing, they want to meet expectations. But as with all the tendencies, the upsides are also the downsides. And upholders can be rigid because they have an idea in their head about how things should go, and it's hard for them sometimes to be flexible, to change if something changes suddenly, they may feel uncomfortable if expectations are ambiguous or it's not clear what's expected of them. And they can also experience tightening. This is when the rules get tighter. And I had this recently because I had some shoulder problems, so I went to physical therapy. And the physical therapist gave me exercises and told me to do them twice a day. But before I knew it, I was doing them 4 times a day because the rules had just gotten tighter. And sometimes that's fine or it doesn't matter, but sometimes it can be kind of annoying or even like, dysfunctional. So you want to make sure if you're an upholder or you're dealing with an upholder that they're not turning into like the mindless bureaucrat of doing their own paperwork endlessly. And also upholders can sometimes seem a little cold because they're going to meet those inner expectations, and it's sort of like, this is the person who's like, yeah, I know we have guests coming for the weekend, but I'm training for the marathon, so I have to go for a 15-mile run on Saturday. What are you going to do? This may seem cold to other people, but to an upholder, it seems appropriate. Or, it can seem like that they're judgmental because they don't understand often why things that come easily to them might be more difficult for other people. So they may not understand what's going on. Next, questioners. And the motto for the questioners is, if you convince me why, then I'll comply. And so they want justifications, reasons. They're always looking how to make processes better. They tend to love information. They're really great for all of us because they're the ones who are saying, like, why are we doing this by Friday? Why are we doing this report? Why are we listening to you? Why are we doing this at all? It saves us all a lot of time. It keeps everything like what's the purpose for the things that we're doing? But the upsides are the downsides. And questioners sometimes drain and overwhelm others with their constant questioning. I gave a talk a couple weeks ago and somebody asked from the audience, do you think that it's appropriate to tell someone that you can only ask 3 questions per conversation? And I was like, well, that is clearly a cry for help. You're dealing with a questioner. So questioners sometimes can be seen to be obstructive or stubborn or being bottlenecks because they just want more and more information to a point that other people don't think is reasonable. But to the questioner, it seems quite reasonable. They're often puzzled why other people seem to do things for no good reason. Another thing that questioners can face is analysis paralysis. This is when their desire for perfect information makes it hard to make a decision or means that they can't move forward. I know 2 questioners who are married to each other, and they were trying to buy a dishwasher for their summer house, and it took like 1.5 years because every time it was like, well, this dishwasher, why not that dishwasher? And if we're going to do the dishwasher, let's do the countertops. And if we're going to do the countertops, let's do the roof deck. And so went on. So what do you do if you're a questioner or you're dealing with a questioner who's stuck in analysis paralysis? One is to use deadlines, and that's what they use. We have company coming in a couple weeks. We have to get a dishwasher before our guests arrive. That gave them a deadline. Another is limits. You can interview 5 people for this job position, but we're not going to interview 15 people. Or you find trusted authorities. If you want to buy a new great bicycle, you could spend the rest of your life trying to figure out what is the best bicycle. Or you could just go to a really, really great bike shop and think, the people who work here really know a lot about bikes. I can be very guided by their judgment. And something else about questioners is they sometimes run into trouble when they are seen to be disrespectful, not team players, insubordinate, undermining of authority, because their questions can make others feel that they're being disrespectful. Questioner children often encounter this with teachers and coaches and parents, and questioner adults often face this, say, in the workplace. Because if you get a very thin-skinned boss and you're asking all these questions, that person may begin to think, you're undermining my judgment, you're questioning my authority, I feel like you're not a team player, I don't want to work with you. But to the questioner, these questions seem totally valuable and completely valid. And if the boss says something like, well, do it because I say so, or do it because corporate said so, or do it because this is the way we've always done it, well, this is totally illegitimate to the questioner, of course. They're going to reject that utterly. And so questioners need to learn to ask questions in a way that seem constructive so that they don't encounter a lot of conflict with other people. So next, obligers. So obligers are the rock of the world. They are the type O. They are the type that pairs up the most easily with the other tendencies. They're the biggest tendency. And they make great team members, great leaders, great family members, great friends, great colleagues. Really, the frustration of being an obliger falls most on obligers themselves, which is reflected in their motto, which is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. Because obligers really are frustrated by this fact that they can meet the expectations of other people, but they're frustrated by their inability to meet their own expectations for themselves. So what is the answer? What's the cure for this? How do you deal with this if you're an obliger or you're dealing with an obliger? It is absolutely simple and straightforward. If you want to meet an inner expectation, you must create systems of outer accountability around that inner expectation. You want to read more? Join a book group. What would I say to my friend who is having trouble exercising? I would say, join a class, work out with a trainer, work out with a friend who's going to be disappointed with you if you don't show up. Take your dog for a run, and your dog is going to be so sad if he doesn't get to go for his run, plus he's going to tear up the living room furniture. Think of your duty to be a role model for other people. There are a million ways to create accountability. Once you realize that's what you need, there must be outer accountability. Now, sometimes obligers are like, well, I just want to learn to put myself first. In my observation, that doesn't really work. What works is creating outer accountability. And again, there's a million ways to create it once you realize that's what you need. Now, obligers vary dramatically in what makes them feel accountable. Some can feel accountable to something like an auto text from an app, and some need actual consequences from a real person. So you want to be thinking about, if you're an obliger, you're dealing with an obliger, what are the systems of accountability that are going to make a difference? Here is an interesting thing about obligers. They often show a pattern of obliger rebellion. This is when an obliger will meet expectations, and then suddenly they snap, And they think, this I will not do. And sometimes it's small and kind of funny. I've heard from many obligers who will deliberately sit in their cars in the office parking lot in order to be deliberately late for work. And sometimes it's huge and destructive. I'm going to end a 20-year friendship. I'm going to get a divorce. I'm going to quit my job and go work for a competitor because I've had it. You're dead to me. I'm never coming back to this. And what it is, it's meant to protect a rebel, an obliger, because it blows up a situation where an obliger feels exploited, neglected, taken advantage of, or where expectations have just become too heavy. And so it's meant to be a preservative because it just explodes up the situation. But it's often very destructive because it's not a reason to push back. It's a volcano exploding. It's the lid being blown off a pot. And obligers will often say to them, I'm acting out of character. This isn't how I usually am. But it's actually a very predictable pattern when obligers fall into that deep place of anger and resentment. And so if you are an obliger or you're dealing with obligers, you want to be on the lookout for places where that might be building in order to keep obliger rebellion from, it's better to thwart it than to have it be experienced. So for instance, if you're a manager and you're looking at your teams, you might say, why is it that some people are on several committees and some people are on 1 or 2 committees? Why are a few people picking up all the extra shifts and a lot of people are picking up no extra shifts? Why is one person doing all the unpleasant work travel and nobody else is doing it? Why haven't you taken a vacation in 18 months? I want you to come back on Friday and tell me when you're going to take a vacation. This is really important because that obliger rebellion can be very destructive once it sets in. Now finally, rebels. So there's a lot of power in the rebel tendency. Their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. They can do anything they want to do, but it can be challenging to be working or living with somebody who every time you ask or tell them to do something is very likely to resist. And rebels themselves will often say that they're frustrated because they can't tell themselves what to do. Like somebody said to me, I make a to-do list, like everybody tells you what, that you should, and then the minute it's on the to-do list, I refuse to do it. And I'm like, yeah, that's very predictable for a rebel. There's ways to work around that. So how do you help a rebel or help yourself as a rebel? There's 2 ways to think about that. One is to think about an appeal to identity. Because to a rebel, they always want to put their identity, their true identity out into the world. So you can remind someone, or you can remind yourself, you know what? I'm a strong, energetic, athletic person. That's always who I've been. And they're going to try to keep me trapped in my office underneath fluorescent lights and typing away on a computer, but they can't keep me indoors. No, I am free to go outside. I am free to hike. I am free to bike. I'm going to go for a walk on my lunch hour when I'm supposed to be working on that report because I'm a healthy, active, energetic, athletic person. That's who I am. That's who I want to be. So of course that's the way I behave. That's what I want. The other thing that you can do, and this works especially if you're dealing with a rebel, is to think about information, consequences, choice. You give people the information they need, you tell them the consequences of their action or inaction, and then you let them choose. So let's say you have a rebel colleague who is refusing to go to a mandatory Wednesday morning meeting. You could say to the rebel something like, I don't know if you know that we have these Wednesday 10 a.m. meetings. And you know what we do at the meetings? It's like everybody who's at the meeting, we think about all the projects that are coming up in the next several weeks, and then everybody in the meeting, we take the interesting ones. And then we leave the dregs for the people who aren't at the meeting. So yeah, the meeting's at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays. Information, consequences, choice. It's up to you. 2 important warnings. 1, you must allow negative consequences to fall on that rebel, or else it won't work, which can be very painful to do, but you can't insulate or rescue. And 2, you have to not remind. Don't keep pestering. Every time you give a reminder, or you remind a rebel to do something, you ignite that spirit of resistance. On our podcast, we had 2 people ask us in the same week, how do I help my rebel sweetheart look for a job? What can I do to be helpful? And the answer that I came up with was so radical that I actually called a rebel and made sure it was the right answer because I was like, oh my gosh. And what is the answer? How do you help a rebel look for a job? You do nothing. No reminders, no Excel spreadsheets, no list of helpful phone numbers on the fridge, because every time you do that, you will ignite the spirit of resistance. These folks know they need a job. So finally, the last thing I'd say, and then we're going to have a conversation, is I really do think that this can help you show compassion for yourself, Because there's nothing wrong with you. You're not lazy. You don't lack willpower. It's totally predictable that something that's easy for someone else might be challenging for you. Many people are probably feeling exactly the same frustration that you are. There's plenty of ways to work around that. So you don't need to change. You just need to fix things so that you can get where you want to go. And it can also allow us to show more compassion to other people. Because when we understand other people, then it's not a matter of one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just how do we both, or all of us, get where we want to go without taking things personally and without conflict. And the last little story that I will tell is from my own life. This just happened to me recently. I'm married to a questioner, and I admire and imitate his questioner ways often, and I'm often incredibly annoyed by them. And I had to fill out a boring bureaucratic form, and I called him because it asked me for his work address, and I didn't know his work address. And I said, "Hey, Jamie, what's your work address?" And he said, "Why do you want to know?" And I thought, 5 years ago I would have said to myself, why is everything a discussion? Why can't you answer a simple question? What does this mean about our marriage? And now I'm like, I know better. He just needs to know why. I should have said, "Hey, Jamie, I'm filling out that boring bureaucratic form. What's your work address?" And he would have told me. Because I didn't have to take it personally. I didn't have to get into a fight. Because he's a questioner. He's like that with everybody. He just needs the answers to his questions. And so my hope is that using the Four Tendencies, it will help to shine a spotlight on hidden patterns in our behavior in a way that can really help us create lives for ourselves and for other people that allow us to be happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gretchen. That was a fantastic summary of this brilliant paradigm. I love that you're upholder, your husband is questioner, I'm rebel, my husband's obliger.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
yeah.
We've got the whole...
So
right.
it's all there.
Oh, and that's one thing I should mention, is that when there is a rebel, this is by far the most striking pattern among the tendencies. When there's a rebel, in romance or in a work team, like a founding team, a rebel is almost always paired with an obliger. That is very much the dominant pattern.
Oh, well,
almost
if there's
always.
any other obligers in the room, I might be looking for a replacement. That's the rebel in me coming out.
There you go, yeah.
So I mentioned about the changes that I've made in my life since discovering your work, because Better Than Before, your previous book, it went into quite a lot of detail about the Four Tendencies, but then there was so much more to say, which is why this other book is so helpful. But for me, it was weight loss, exercise regime, better organisation of my workday. What are the other changes that people have talked to you about that they've introduced in their lives as a result of understanding themselves better?
Well, a lot of it is people who are very frustrated because they've tried and failed to do something, and they're like, well, it's really important to me, so I don't understand why I can't eat more healthfully, or why I can't exercise, or why I can't work on my novel, or whatever. So part of it is personal things. Then a lot of it is also doctors and nurses, physical therapists, nutritionists, people who are working in people in a healthcare setting where they're so eager for tools that will help them to communicate with people more effectively, to get them to take their prescription. I don't know about in the UK, but in the US, some estimates are that up to 50% of adults don't take prescription medication for a chronic health condition. So, if you could just get people to take their medicine, they would be so much healthier, or to do their rehab exercises after surgery. So a lot of people I hear from are in healthcare, a lot of parents who don't understand why they keep having certain conflicts with their child, or they're trying to help their child deal with school more effectively. I don't understand why my child's not doing their homework. They're so smart, and it's like, okay, well, let's think about why that might be. So I hear from in a lot of different areas.
And I'm so interested in how you got into this area of research, because by definition, you're an upholder, which is basically a goody-goody, as I see it. And surely it must be strange.
Unbiased opinion.
Yeah, it must be strange for you, because if you want to change something in your life, you just change it because you can, unlike the other three tendencies.
Well, that's
so has it been strange for you to come to this? And didn't you just think, oh, those people can just get on with their own mess?
No, but this is exactly one of the reasons that I was looking for, trying to find the Four Tendencies even before I'd identified them. Because, so my book, The Happiness Project, came out. And after it came out, people kept saying to me, but how did you get yourself to do all these things? And I said, well, I thought that they would make me happier, so I decided to do them. And then they did make me happier, so I just kept doing them. And they would look very puzzled, and they would say, but how did you get yourself to do it? And I was like, I don't understand this question. And so I began to have a feeling like something's different about me. And I think it was actually an advantage in understanding the Four Tendencies that I was either an upholder or rebel, because I think coming from that extreme position that not many people are in made it more obvious to me how people were different from me. And so I became very interested in this. And then as I became more and more interested in happiness and the role that habits could play, I was like, well, so often people know what would make them happier, and yet they're not able to follow through. So in a way that doesn't really make sense to me, but what's getting in their way? And so that's when I really started searching out for patterns in when people would run into stumbling blocks. How could you understand what those patterns were?
You mentioned as well that you sometimes borrow some of your husband's ways of thinking as a questioner.
Yes.
Do you think that once people have become more familiar with these different tendencies, which I mean, I've read so much about it, and they do seem to describe everybody. There isn't anybody who defies description. Do you think that we can adopt parts of other tendencies that we actually change?
Yeah, well, I don't know that we actually change our core tendency, but I think you're exactly right. And I think, certainly for me in studying the Four Tendencies, one of the things that has been most helpful is first understanding like why other people are behaving in a different way from me, or why their behavior seems inexplicable. And so you can relate better, but I also think you can understand the weaknesses and limitations of your tendency, and so you can sort of consciously try to adapt them. So for instance, with my husband, so as a questioner, he's always questioning, and as an upholder, one of the weaknesses is that I'm too readily accepting an expectation. I'm really good at doing things, so sometimes I just do things that I maybe would be better off not even doing just because I can. And so I've learned to pause and to think, should I do this? And sometimes I'll even say to my husband, should I do this? And he'd be like, why would you do that? And that's helpful to me because it keeps me from wasting my time and energy on things that I don't really need to be bothering to do. And also rebel. Rebel was hard for me because these are the opposite personality types. It was very hard for me to really understand the rebel tendency. And I have to say, it has so opened my eyes. The tremendous freedom from expectations that rebels possess is something that I think the other three tendencies really should study and learn from, because the fact is we're more free than we think. We're way more free than we think. And I feel like studying the rebel tendency really reminded me of how you are choosing. And when you say, I have to do something, very often you don't really have to do that. And so you might choose to do it. But I think it's a good reminder that that there is more freedom, and the rebels are a good example of that.
Well, unfortunately, as a rebel, I have to open up to audience questions. I'm really always intrigued when there's other rebels in the room. Maybe they just won't ask any questions. Or maybe they'll want to ask all the questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. We've got lots. Great. Let's get 3 questions in and start going. So are we going to take microphones as well? Yeah, great. If you could wait for the microphone. So I'll jot down the questions. We'll take 3 to start off with. Hi.
Hello. Hello, my name's Fiona. I'm an obliger, but I tip towards rebel, and my wife is a rebel tipping towards obliger. But what I tend to find is we have a negative habit where I think we both rebel towards one another and oblige out a bit more, yes, which can cause a bit of conflict. So I'm wondering, any tips on rebelling out more and obliging more in?
Wow, great technical question. Thank you very much. Yes, and the couple over here. Can we get a microphone to these people? Thank you very much. Lovely. Hi.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I just wondered whether the tendencies change over time, over age. So when you're younger, you're more rebellion, or, does it evolve?
Lovely question. Thank you very much, Nancy. And just in front of you there.
Oh. Hi. I've been following your work for a bunch of years, and I'm in the stage of life right now where you were when you started the Happiness Project, which is little kids, pram in the hall, and I'm a freelance writer. And I'm an upholder, but I find that when it comes to my kids, I cannot put my needs above theirs, and my writing has gone away. My youngest is 3. I really feel like it should be coming back, but it's almost like when it comes to them, I'm an obliger, and I put so much into them, and then I get resentful, and I do a little obliger rebellion, like I just refuse to be the class rep of my kid's class in a really mean way that lost me a lot of friends, kind of blew things up at her school. So I'm wondering, when you had little kids, How did you do that? How did you put your needs above theirs? I mean, I know you're an upholder, and I am too, but when it comes to them, you know, I really can struggle.
What a great question. Thank you.
These are great. Okay,
Yeah.
so, wait,
So do you want to start with that one?
Oh, okay, I can start with that. Yeah. Okay, so, and you alluded to this too, Fiona. So with the tendencies, you can sort of tip to one of the other tendencies that overlap. So you were saying that you're an upholder. It sounds like you're an upholder who tips to obliger. So upholders who tip to obliger do feel the weight of outer expectations more. I'm an upholder who tips to questioner, which we score higher on the kind of coldness side, because we're like, yeah, sorry, I got to do my stuff. So a friend of mine who's also a writer has, what she does in exactly this situation, I don't know if this would work for you, is she leaves her home. She doesn't try to work from home. She says the only way she can shut out the noise of those outer expectations is to physically create a barrier. So she, you know, she only will respond to like an emergency text or phone call, and she's out of her house so that she's not aware of it. And so if you can create some kind of barrier like that, that might work, because you're right. It can feel very intrusive, and like you can't say no. And you might also try something that works for many obligers, which is to say, to think to yourself, if I say yes to you, I have to say no to someone else. And so you could say like, well, if I say yes to this request in this child part of my life, then I'm going to have to say no in this other part of my life. And so when you weigh them like that, sometimes you can choose which expectation feels more important overall, rather than just sort of responding in the moment.
Very good. So let's go to Fiona's question, which was about obliger and rebel, both with tendencies on each side, and how do you stop those bleeding into each other?
Well, so you pointed out something that's very true about obligers, which is, so obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So unfortunately, what this means in romantic relationships is that very often, you know, out of the deepest love, it's like, you're so close to me, you're like me, so I'm going to ignore you, just like I ignore me. And so inner expectations often don't work. A sweetheart doesn't make a good outer expectations, because they often will move to inner. And again, this is where there's differences, because for some obligers, a sweetheart could be a good accountability partner or would feel like the weight of outer expectations, but not for all. So maybe what you should do is you should both try to figure out some way of creating true outer expectations for your needs as a couple. Now, if your sweetheart is a rebel, then that's going to get a little bit more complicated. So you're going to have to think through how this is a choice, this is what we want. Often, you know, if there's like unpleasant tasks that have to be done, thinking about how you could delegate those or automate those. But don't feel like that inner expectation can be generated from within the couple.
Very good. Okay. And then Nancy's question about where the tendencies change over age, and be interested to hear something about children.
So I do believe that the tendencies are hardwired, that you're not one at 20 and one at 40, you're not one at work and one at home. Now with children, sometimes it can be hard to tell what the tendency is of a child, because they're not autonomous in the way that adults are. So sometimes you can't tell. Like my daughter's 18, and only recently did I really feel confident that she's a questioner. But with some children, it's obvious very, very early. And when people say to me like, oh, all toddlers are questioners, or all teenagers are rebels, they really aren't. When you see the real thing, you know. And they might go through a little phase, but it's not this kind of pervasive thing that lasts year after year. And many rebels have just spontaneously told me about the transformative moment when they were very, very young, like 2 years old, 3 years old, when they realize no one can tell me what to do. And so I think for some children it shows up very early, and some children you can't tell till later. Now, if you feel like you yourself have changed over time, I think it's probably because circumstances have changed for you. Now, this is something that's often confusing for upholders and obligers, because if you're an obliger who has total outer expectations, which is not that uncommon, really, you sort of can't tell the difference between you're an obliger and upholder. And you see this often with journalists, where journalists are like, oh, well, I was totally an upholder, or like, you know, I had no trouble meeting my writing deadlines when I was at work, but now that I'm freelance, like I've got writer's block. And I'm like, no, it's not writer's block. At one time you had outer expectations of an editor and deadlines and team colleagues, and now you're on your own, and so you don't have that infrastructure. So it might look like the tendency was changing, but actually circumstances were changing. Or like somebody said to me, they were like, oh, well, anybody who knew me as a teenager would have said I was a rebel, but I'm an obliger, and I was doing exactly what my friends expected me to do.
That's so interesting. Wow, thank you. Great questions. More questions, please.
Yeah, these are great questions.
Yes, one from this gentleman here, please. Let's take another 3 as well.
Hi, I'm Doug Mather, and I'm a questioner. So kind of picking up in a way on the last question about, as you say, that tendencies are fixed for life, and also it's difficult to identify children's ones. But what I'm really interested in is the sort of your views on nature versus nurture in the development of tendencies, or are they perhaps a bit like children's demons in Philip Pullman's books, and that they take time to settle?
What would the demons be for the Four Tendencies?
That's a great
we must all
question.
take a sidebar.
That ties into
That's a great
Gretchen's
question.
love of children's literature. Yes, this gentleman in the middle over here, please. And did you just point to somebody as well?
No.
I've just disappointed.
The microphone just scooted around.
Good afternoon, my name's Chris. I work a lot with Germans who seem to do a lot of questioning, so I'm just wondering whether there are national characteristics.
Fantastic question. Dankeschön, Chris. And there's one rebellious hand at the front over here. Can we go to this? Oh, we've had 3 women and then 3 men.
Hi, my name's Jeremy. My question is, evolving on that one, are there any sort of self-selecting biases in professions? Whether it's in the caring professions as opposed to the financial professions?
Right.
Great.
Okay, so the first
So
one.
it was about the demon.
Oh, great, but what was the
Damon,
first
and
part
was
about it?
whether
Nature versus nurture.
nature versus nurture.
So, you know, I'm a big believer in the genetic basis of personality. So I really think that people bring these tendencies into the world with them. And so they aren't really a function of your upbringing. Now, of course, the circumstances in which you find yourself are going to affect the way your personality comes out. So if you're a questioner in North Korea, you are going to learn to tamp that down. And if you're a questioner in Silicon Valley, that might work great for you. And so, of course, your environment is going to make a difference. Or if you have a parent who's, you know, really trying to, you know, resist something about you, or really is, you know, or like if you have a questioner parent who's very, very patient with your questioner ways as a child, then it might come out more readily. But, you know, now sometimes, and we've all known people like this, where people go through a circumstance where you really feel like they are fundamentally changed. You're like, this person is not the same person that I knew 5 years ago. Like a very serious brush with death, a long bout with addiction, medication that has like very fundamental effects on the way a person's personality comes out, you know, some kind of really, really traumatic thing. Sometimes can make people's tendencies shift, but that's rare. For the most part, I think it is a matter of just, it's part of what's hardwired into your personality. Now, as to national characteristics, I think certain kind of national flavors will sort of have more of a feeling of one tendency or another, but I bet people might not even agree what that is. Because, like, if you were saying to me that Germany was a questioner country, that's not the first one that would come to my mind. But so, you know, so part of it, and somebody said to me yesterday, they were like, oh, well, the United States, that's an upholder country. And I'm like, oh, see, I would have thought we would be a rebel country, because we put such a high value on innovation and disruption and all that. So I think, I don't think that it would break down. I think they would see the same kind of range that other countries would see. But certainly, there are, you know, it's like the Swiss are always on time or whatever. You do see things like that, but I don't think that you would have a whole country that would be dominated by one tendency over another. And what was the
Jeremy's question about profession.
Oh, professions. Well, so this is interesting. Now, one thing about the tendencies is this is just one narrow slice of your personality. And sometimes with personality frameworks, like people want to paint a whole picture of you. Or people will say to me, well, you know, I'm a journalist, so of course I'm a questioner. It doesn't really work like that. All you know from a tendency is how somebody responds to expectations. So we could line up 50 obligers, and depending on how ambitious they were, how considerate of other people's feelings they were, how intellectual they were, how analytical they were, how extroverted or introverted they were, how controlling they were, how neurotic they were, all these things would make the people look very, very different from each other. It is not the case that all obligers are people pleasers. Oh no, I know many curmudgeonly obligers. You know, so you can't, all you know is how does the person respond to expectations. And so when you think about why someone's successful in a particular profession, of course, many, many, many things go into it. But I do think you can think about why a particular tendency might make you better suited or worse suited to a particular profession or a particular environment. For instance, let's say you're going into a job interview, and the person says, well, in this environment, we really expect people to be self-starters. Everybody's off on their own. Every day is different. Like, you know, we don't check up on you. We expect everybody to be kind of an independent operator.
This is my ideal job.
Right. You know, and like, hey, maybe it's sales. And hey, man, whatever you need to do to get that sale, that's cool. Okay, right. That would not appeal to an obliger, right? Obligers might want to be in a place where, you know what, this is a place with a lot of structure. We do things, we've got a real vision of how we want things to be done, and we want everybody to stay on the same page. We really believe in teamwork. You know, we believe in like making decisions in a linear way, and we're going to be very clear with you with what expectations are. You know, there's a lot of communication. You know, to an obliger, that might sound great. I had an obliger who said, I go into a job interview, and I'm like, I need a tough boss. That's how I do my best work. But so, again, it's not that one environment is better than the other. It's just that one would suit you and one would suit me. And so you want to think about, well, if I'm going into a place where what corporate says goes, that might make my questioner self crazy. For somebody else, that might not be a big deal. And also, like, how, just sort of the natural, like, the way in which you feel most comfortable could suit you to a particular profession or not. But it's not like, oh, you're a bank regulator, so you have to be an upholder. Now, anybody could do that job, but it might come more easily or feel more comfortable to certain people.
Great, thank you. Thanks for those great questions. More questions, please. I do want to ask quickly, though, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, which tendency is Donald Trump?
Oh, that's completely obvious. And I mean, and everyone, of supporters and critics alike, would agree that he is really a classic rebel, in that you cannot tell him what to do.
I worried that might be the answer.
No, and you know, and I mean, even little things like, I mean, I remember with the whole thing with the income taxes, where he was just like, he said he would release his income taxes, and then he's like, well, actually, I'm not going to release my income taxes. And as an upholder, I was truly like, I feel like gravity was just violated. I mean, is that possible? Because like he said he would, and now he didn't. It's like he doesn't have to. Or like with the eclipse, you know, we had an eclipse in the United States, and it was like a super big deal. And there was like a thing, there was footage where it was like, don't look at the sun, and he immediately looked at the sun. You know, but you know, some people would say, well, this is a strength. No one can tell him what to do. He's an independent thinker. Like people say, oh, you have to sign this. You have to do this. He doesn't have to. So I think it's often very difficult to tell people's tendencies from the outside. You have to understand how they're thinking, because sometimes, you know, you could have one kid who's not doing his homework. Well, is it because he thinks, well, this is a dumb waste of my time and I'm not going to do your stupid assignment? Or is it a rebel who's thinking, you know, who's a questioner? Or is it a child who's thinking, well, you're not the boss of me, you can't tell me what to do? The behavior looks the same from the outside, but it's coming from a very different logic. But I think with Donald Trump, there is so much evidence of the way that he thinks and behaves in different circumstances. It is easy to identify his tendency.
It's great to see a rebel in a position of power. There's a question just at the back here from this gentleman. We'll take another 3. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. I'm interested in the process of questioning that questioners go through, because I'm a questioner. And I'm beginning to think, am I really a questioner? Because what happens is...
As you would, yeah.
So one asks the question, and quite often the answer you get is basically a bit crap. You know, and it goes on being crap. So you ask the next question, you say, what's the real answer? And at that point, if I don't get that, then I just say, well, the hell with that, I'm not going to do that. Or I do it in a very sullen and resentful kind of fashion.
If what you're being asked to do you think isn't a good idea?
No, the answer is not satisfactory.
Right.
I just can't get a good answer out of people as to why is this happening.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere else. Yes, a couple over here, please. Thank you. Is your husband like that all the time?
Oh, yeah. Oh, but so here's another thing about questioners. They often refuse to answer questions. Maddening. And why is that? I don't know. But if you say to my husband, what time are we leaving? He won't tell me.
I have to say I'm a very big fan, Gretchen.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear.
There's a group of us that have done the Happiness Project, and they're actually watching online. They couldn't come.
Good, excellent. Hey.
One of them's texted me to ask you a question.
Oh, good.
And I'm an obliger, so that's why I'm obliging. Can you do anything to move from being an obliger to an upholder so I can focus more on my own expectations without needing others?
That's Nancy's question, yeah. Great, thank you. And there's a lady behind you, I think. Oh, no, in front, sorry.
Hi, my name's Pamela. I know you've talked about children and maybe not being able to, you said about your daughter at 18, but I just wondered, is there a role for this in teaching? Because, I've only just come across your book and seeing, in my son's school, just some of the issues they have and sometimes how motivated he is with one teacher versus another. Is there a way for teachers to understand more about the children in their class and the children to understand more about the teachers as well and there? So it's a two-way, if you like, two-way process.
So should I start with that one?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I've heard from so many teachers and parents and coaches about exactly that. And in fact, I am going to write a quiz specifically for children because so many people have asked for that. And I have a one-pager, if you want, on my website. There's all these one-pagers for how to use them in different circumstances, and there's ones for teachers and coaches and parents. I absolutely think, though, that it's really helpful in teaching because a lot of times I think teachers don't understand why someone is resisting. And I've heard so many poignant stories from, particularly from questioners and rebels, about why they were in, school circumstances, which for me, would not have been hard to solve. And yet they just sort of were butting heads in a way that's kind of needless once you understand where someone's coming from. And in fact, I got the most poignant email from a woman who said that she had a rebel child who was in 2nd grade and crying in school all the time, 8 years old. And she said, I ran to I drove to the bookstore, got the book, underlined the parts that applied to my daughter, put the Post-it notes, and gave it to the teacher that said, can you please try to understand my daughter? Because she was a rebel herself, so she totally got it. And to her immense credit, the teacher was very open to this. Because I would think as a teacher, you're like, oh yeah, here's somebody coming with another book for me to read. But the teacher was very open to it and said, this is a really good tool. And it really did, she said, it really did minimize the conflict between the teacher and the student because they just understood how they were coming to it. So one of the things that is really exciting for me is thinking how to apply it in that context and how even the way that assignments are given or presented. Because if you say to a kid, because if a kid says, well, why do I have to learn the multiplication tables if I can just look it up in my phone? And you say, because all 10-year-olds have to. It's like, that doesn't work. That's just not convincing to a kid. So why not find a way to communicate more effectively? So yes, I think because a lot of times it's just in the way, it's the power of words and the power of phrasing. And often reminding a child of what they want, because it's like with rebels, they often want to, if you're the piano teacher, instead of saying, you have to practice, I'm telling you have to practice, you say, you're such a performer. I don't think many 12-year-olds could play a piece of music this tough, but I don't know. I've seen you do some amazing work. I would love to see you on stage. But it is pretty challenging. You let me know if you think you can do it. And it's like, to the kid then, it's like, I'm a performer, watch me master this piece of print music. Not like I have to, you want to. We're going to make a sticker sheet, and you're going to get rewards and stickers and punishments. It's like, no, this is what you want. Now, to the obliger wanting to meet their inner expert. So I hear this from a lot of times, obligers wanting to be upholders. But here's the thing. Can you change your deep inborn self? I don't think so. But even if you can, it would be very, very difficult. But you don't have to. There is a short, easy way to do this. And if you're an obliger who wants to act like an upholder, it's super easy. You just have to create outer accountability for whatever that inner expectation is. But the fact is, saying to yourself, I need to take more time for myself, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work for obligers. You need to build in outer accountability. So what it is, identify whatever the behaviors, the actions, the habits would be that would make you feel like you were taking care of yourself. And then build in that outer accountability. And the thing is, obligers even need outer accountability for things that are fun. So it's like, you might say oh, I really want to get a massage, but I can never spend money on myself. I can never make time for myself, so I never do it. So I've heard of a couple great solutions to this. One is, and there's hundreds, but two good examples. So one was, it's like you and I are sisters-in-law. And so if you're going to hold me accountable for going to the spa, and I'm going to hold you accountable for going to the spa. But if you don't go, I can't go. So you have to go to the spa, so I get my spa day. So we're going to hold each other accountable because we're both obligers. Or here was a very, very beautiful one. A friend of mine is the writer Allison Gilbert, who writes a lot about being a parentless parent. And she's also an obliger. And she said she could never spend money on herself. She was always spending money on her children or her husband, and she was never making time for herself until she started to think, this is what my mother would buy for me if she were still here. My mother would want this for me. My mother would say, Allison, you need to take a day off from work. And so I will do it because that's what my dead mother would say I should do. And so in that way, she was able to create a kind of imaginary outer accountability that allowed her to take care of herself. Sometimes obligers can think of the future self. Well, my future self is really going to wish that I had that I had gone to sleep on time and that I didn't stay up doing X, Y, or Z. Or my future self is really going to wish that I'd gone to the gym. Or my future self is really going to wish that I had made time to go to my book club. So I have to do it for my future self. To me, this felt very advanced, this using the imaginary accountability of the future self, but many obligers are able to do it. So, but again, it's just some form of outer accountability is what is necessary, even for inner expectations. It's the answer, any obliger question always has the same answer. Outer accountability. That's what it is.
Great, thank you. Fantastic questions.
Yeah.
More questions, please. Yes, the one at the front here.
I've never done this 3 questions in a row before.
Yeah.
This is
Do you get through?
Yeah, this is interesting.
Hi.
Hi, sorry, I'm just going to find it. One from Twitter. So a question says, as an introverted obliger, I find it painful to ask others to keep me accountable.
Yes.
So struggle to achieve personal goals. Any tips?
Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Good one. Good
great.
one. Good one. These are such good questions.
Yes, there was one. Yes, please. This lady with the sequins, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It's kind of the opposite to that one over there. How to dial down being an upholder, because sometimes it's really annoying
Yes. Yes.
to myself.
Tightening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Good.
that's about your life, Gretchen. And this gentleman here. Thank you, lovely.
I'm loving the Four Tendencies. Just my fear is people are really quick to judge and label others without really knowing them.
Oh, yes, good point. Great.
Okay.
Well, should we start with the tips for the obligers who don't want to ask anyone else?
Introverted obligers. Yes, I've heard that from many people because they're like, I don't want to take an exercise class. I don't want to join Weight Watchers. I don't want to be in that kind of environment. So fortunately, there are many forms of accountability that do not require kind of that face-to-face contact that introverts want to minimize. So like one thing is I have this app called the Better app, which you can just search online for Better Gretchen Rubin or on desktop. And there you can join a group, that doesn't meet in real life. That's just on the app, where you can either launch or join an accountability group. And there are accountability groups for all kinds of things, from gardening to writing a PhD thesis to exercise. Because this idea that it's in an app, it's very convenient, so it also works for people who are very pressed for time. But then it's also, it feels like it's not that kind of personal pressure. And then some obligers are able to use like apps that have reminder functions, that like send notifications to remind you. So again, it's sort of impersonal. But again, some obligers don't respond to that. So you have to think about what's gonna work for you. You can also think of something like your duty as a role model for other people, just even as like showing something in the world. So it's not that you're joining a group to do it, but you might say to yourself, well, I need to be a good model for other members of my family, or I want to be a good model for my team at work, that I'm going to stick to my exercise. And again, this could all be in your head. Like they might not even care if you go to the gym or not, but if you have that idea in your head, like, or sometimes what people will do is announce that they're going to do something, and then they feel kind of the social pressure of people knowing that that's what they're going to do. My sister Elizabeth is an obliger, and she will often do that because she's a television writer. She works in Hollywood. She often is starting new jobs, and she's a type 1 diabetic, so she really shouldn't eat a bunch of junk food, which they have, giant troves of junk food in these offices. So the first day she runs around to everybody and is like, I've got to eat really healthy because I'm a type 1 diabetic, so you're not going to see me eating that junk food, and then she feels kind of the social pressure, but it's not in a groupy way. And then, there's things on Facebook and, Instagram feeds, and so part of it is just to say to yourself, given that what works for me, how can I create systems of outer accountability that don't rely on kind of like face-to-face? And one thing that's always good to ask yourself, no matter what your tendency in any context is there a time in the past where I did succeed in keeping this? Like with my friend on the track team, what taught me was that there was a time when she could do it. So that was a big clue. So if you say to yourself, well, I'm not doing a good job cooking dinner at home But was there a time when I did do it? Because often there's an important clue when you think about what's changed in your environment, that at one time you were able to do it and now you're not. Yeah.
How to dial down being an overly strict upholder.
Okay, so for upholders, always inner expectations have weight, but in order for inner expectations to be met, they must be articulated. And so if you are feeling, and I've gone through this myself many times, if you're feeling like the weight is becoming too heavy, you really want to sit down and consciously think like, I'm doing this, but it's not efficient, it's not working for me, I need to change my inner expectation. And here's an example where this worked. I talked to a woman who was a medical student, and she said, well, I never read my notes before class to prepare, but then a few times I read my notes before class to prepare, and now I read my notes before class to prepare for every class, even though I know it's not really the best use of my time and energy. And I was like, that's tightening. I was like, okay, what you need to do is really sit down and think through, is this an expectation I want to place on myself or not? Really take yourself through the process of consciously deciding what is the right rule for you. Because once you have it clear in your mind, it's often easy to dial it back when you think about what's right for you. It's when you just kind of unthinkingly let it gather momentum. And you might also avoid certain situations. For instance, I have our original producer, Henry Malofsky, for our podcast, if you know the podcast, he's an upholder, and his girlfriend was trying to convince him to use one of these budgeting apps where you monitor every penny you spend. For many people, this works really, really well. But Henry was like, you know, I knew myself too well. I would be spending way, way too much time and energy, and I would get super focused on doing this, like every penny I spent. It's not a good use of my time and energy, so a tool like that is not good for me. So part of it as a upholder is to be like, okay, you know what? I know where madness lies. Don't go down that path.
And finally, we'll finish on this, I think. It's this brilliant observation that we all, I think, know our own tendencies, but isn't it quite dangerous to look at others and criticize them and label their tendencies, because we might not even get it right?
Well, that's an excellent, excellent point, a great final point, because, you know, and one of the things, some people really resist the idea of using any kind of label because they say, you know, if you define me, you can find me. And really, this vocabulary is meant to help us illuminate, you know, things about ourselves that we're frustrating or puzzling, or things about other people that are puzzling and frustrating. It's meant to be helpful. It's not meant to be something that constricts people's possibility or their sense of growth. But absolutely, there's a risk, like with all these kinds of things, that someone's like, well, you're a rebel, so of course you're impossible. Or, well, you can't ask me to do that because I'm a questioner. You know, you don't want it to become a crutch or something that's just an excuse, because all of these have limitations and weaknesses that can be overcome. So the question is, if there's something that's an issue, it's not like, well, you get to just hand wave. It's like, okay, given that that's the situation, how do we create a situation that works for both of us? And again, just to reemphasize, you can't know someone's tendency from looking at them from the outside. You have to understand their thinking. And so you can't, you know, snap judgments. I mean, in truth, there are some, like, tells. Like, anytime someone's talking a lot about being spontaneous, I'm like, okay, it's probably a rebel. And anytime somebody starts complaining that things are arbitrary, I'm like, yeah, questioner. And people who talk about self-care, that's going to be an obliger. And people who talk fondly about discipline are usually upholders. But these are just generalities, you know. But it's also my hope that having a vocabulary like this, it can act like a shorthand to help people reach greater understanding. But it's absolutely true. You don't want to dismiss people, or just you know, lose the nuance, or feel like you understand everything about them when in fact, you know, we can understand so little even about ourselves. You know what I mean? Let alone other people. So it's meant to be a tool that can be helpful, but absolutely it's not something that should overwhelm our desire to understand kind of the total of someone's experience.
Well, Gretchen, I'm thrilled that you've used your innate tendency for extreme discipline to pin down these 4 brilliant tendencies. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for now. Thank you for your brilliant questions. Please do continue the conversation outside. There are copies of the book on sale. Gretchen's sticking around. And please continue the conversation online as well on the RSA
and I love
Twitter
hearing
feed.
from people, so
that would be great. So yeah, thank you so much for all of you to coming. Thanks to the author of Four Tendencies, Gretchen Rubin.